I'll talk a little bit more about adapting the ceremony in a minute. Along that line, by the way, the original endowment did not last an hour and a half or 2 hours. The original endowment lasted, quote, the better part of a day. That's from the Temple Endowment on Church History Topics. Even after Joseph administered the presentation of the endowment to this first group of people, he told Brigham Young that the ceremony was not perfect and needed some modifications. He said this, quote, "This is not arranged right, but we have done the best we could under the circumstances. I wish you to take this matter in hand and organize and systematize all these ceremonies," end of quote. Brigham would later recall from this later recollection, the secondhand source, that every time Brigham participated in or performed the ceremonies in Nauvoo, he said he, quote, got something more. After Joseph Smith's death, it was Brigham and the 12 who had received all these ordinances that continued to build the temple and then ultimately give these ordinances to roughly 5,000 Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo, Illinois. A major, major work and an empowering work for the church as they prepared to go west. He and the 12 continued to modify and to adapt, to add things to the ceremony, to clarify things in the ceremony, so that the time that they gave them in the Nauvoo temple to these 5,000 Latter-day Saints roughly, Brigham recollected, quote, "We had our ceremonies pretty correct as a whole." But I want you to see that from the beginning, the ceremony was being adapted and that the ceremony was not seen as being set in stone. That's an important idea historically to see. Even in Nauvoo and in the early church, they weren't doing it from any sort of a written or prescribed. It was all oral or transmitted by memory. So of course there was variation. It wasn't until 1877, with the completion of the St. George Temple in southern Utah, that they started to say, let's systematize. Remember, the church, when they get to Utah, they finish the St. George Temple, they're building the Salt Lake Temple, they've got the Logan Temple and the Manti Temple, and Brigham, before he dies, says, let's get this systematized, let's get it all written down. He asked Wilford Woodruff to write down the endowment and the temple ordinances, which Wilford Woodruff said he, quote, wrote all the ordinances and presented them to the satisfaction of President Brigham Young as a whole, and Brigham approved them. Saints Volume 2 puts it this way: as Wilford worked in the temple, Brigham asked him and other church leaders to write out the endowment ceremony and other temple ordinances. Since the time of Joseph Smith, the words of the ordinances had been preserved only through word of mouth. Now that the ordinances would be performed at a distance from church headquarters, Brigham wanted the ceremonies written down to ensure they would occur the same way in each temple. So one main idea I want you to grasp as we talk about the presentation of the endowment versus endowment is this idea is that there's a difference between the two. Remember, a presentation is a teaching tool. Sometimes we say the endowment is a gift. And by that, I think we mean the power of endowment, the power to have the power of God, to receive a fullness of His blessings, to discern truth from error, to understand His purposes, His mysteries, to commune with angels, to receive revelation. Those are all powers. That's the gift. To be bound to Him by covenant, to be cleansed and purified and become one of His great priests or priestesses, kings and queens. Those are all gifts. But the way those gifts are packaged, like we all understand at Christmas, I can make a gift for my children and package it in a lot of ways or present it to them in various ways to get the gift. The words, the actions, the clothing, the setting, the symbols, and other teaching methods can be adapted and altered by those who are in prophetic authority and by revelation. We shouldn't presume to think that what we do, the ceremony that we perform in the temple, is exactly what Adam and Eve or Abraham and Sarah or Joseph and Emma did. It's not. It can't be. Logically, by the way, it's not even the exact same as the ceremony was a year ago at the time of filming this video, let alone 10 years ago or 100 years ago, let alone centuries or millennia ago. Remember, the endowment is a gift, but the presentation of the endowment is how that gift is given, and that can be altered by those who are in prophetic authority. The First Presidency wrote when the most recent changes in the presentation of the endowment came about, through inspiration, the methods of instruction in the temple experience have changed many times, even in recent history, to help members better understand and live what they learn in the temple. For me personally, I think what is ancient in the temple is that there are ancient elements in that ceremony. There are ancient ideas in this order of becoming part of priests or priestesses to God that Adam and Eve and Abraham and Sarah and Joseph and Emma entered into. That's the things that's ancient, or ancient knowledge, ancient truth as a whole. That's why Joseph says this is establishing the order of the Ancient of Days. Endowment is the capacity to come into the presence of God and receive a fullness of his blessings. And the presentation is how those covenants and concepts are communicated. I might be even so bold as to say this, that you and I can participate in the endowment ceremony and not be endowed with power, in the same way that we can participate in a baptism and a conferral of the Holy Ghost and not yet receive the Holy Ghost. Endowment is something, a power that we have to live up to and attain unto through righteous covenant living with God. Presentation of the endowment is teaching us these concepts of how to accomplish that in our life, to receive a fullness of his blessings.